In the early decades of the 20th century, rural Bavaria was defined by isolation, agricultural routine, and a strict social order rooted in land ownership and family lineage. Small farms were scattered across fields and forests, connected by dirt roads and seasonal labor patterns. Life followed the rhythm of livestock care, crop cycles, and church observance. Privacy was limited, but distance between households was enough to allow secrets to exist unnoticed for long periods. Within this environment stood a remote farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck, located several kilometers from the village of Gruber. It was not a village itself, but a solitary agricultural property surrounded by woodland and fields. The farm was modest but functional, consisting of a main house, adjoining barns, storage buildings, and a courtyard enclosed by fences and outbuildings. The Gruber family lived on this farm. Andreas Gruber was the patriarch. He was an older man, physically strong, accustomed to hard labor, and known locally for his rigid temperament. His wife, Cecilia Gruber, shared the daily responsibilities of the farm and household. Their adult daughter, Victoria Gabriel, lived with them after the death of her husband during the First World War. Victoria had two children. One was a young daughter, also named Cecilia, and the other was a small boy named Joseph, born several years later. The identity of Joseph's father was a matter of speculation in the local community. Gossip surrounded the family, fueled by rumors of incest and previous legal proceedings involving Andreas and Victoria. These rumors were known but rarely discussed openly. Rural communities often tolerated silence more than confrontation. Despite the social tension, the farm continued to operate. The Grubers employed occasional help, including maidservants who assisted with household tasks and childcare. Several months before the murders, a previous maid abruptly left her position. She later claimed that she heard strange noises in the attic and felt watched at night. Her statements were dismissed by some as superstition, but they lingered in memory after the events that followed. In the days leading up to the murders, other unusual occurrences were reported. Andreas noticed unfamiliar footprints in the snow leading from the forest toward the farm, but none leading away. A set of keys went missing from the house. A newspaper appeared that no family member remembered purchasing. These details were noted but not acted upon. Life on the farm continued as usual. On evening of March 31, 1922, the household was active. The family attended to chores, animals were fed, and preparations for the night were underway. Earlier that day, a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, had arrived to begin work. She had traveled from a nearby area and brought her belongings with her. It was her first day at Hinterkaifeck. She had not yet settled into the routine of the household. That evening, the family was all present on the farm. There is no evidence of visitors arriving or leaving at that time. No disturbances were reported by neighboring farms, which were too distant to hear anything unusual. At some point during the night, a sequence of killings occurred. The exact order of events has never been conclusively established. Evidence suggests that members of the family were lured one by one into the barn. There, they were attacked with a blunt instrument, later identified as a mattock, a type of farming tool with a sharp blade and a pick-like end. The blows were delivered with force and precision. Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia Gruber, and their daughter Victoria Gabriel were all killed in the barn. Victoria's young daughter was also killed there. Medical examination later revealed that the child may have remained alive for several hours after the attack, pulling at her hair in distress. This detail would become one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. After killing the 4 victims in the barn, the perpetrator or perpetrators entered the house. Inside, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, was attacked and killed in her room. The youngest child, Joseph, was also killed in his crib. The killings showed no signs of haste or panic.
There was no evidence of a struggle that involved multiple attackers acting in chaos. The wounds suggested deliberate actions, repeated blows, and a controlled environment. Valuables were not taken. Money remained in the house. Livestock was not harmed beyond neglect. What followed the murders is as unsettling as the killings themselves. For several days after the deaths, someone remained on the farm. Animals were fed. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney. A dog was heard barking. Neighbors passing by noticed nothing overtly alarming. One neighbor observed that the farm appeared occupied as usual. Another noticed that the mail was not being collected, but did not investigate further. The isolation of the property allowed this situation to persist without immediate scrutiny. Concern grew when Victoria failed to attend church services and her daughter did not appear at school. On April 4, 1922, several people went to the farm to check on the family. Among them were neighbors and a mechanic who had an appointment to repair machinery. At arrival, they noticed irregularities. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet. Eventually, the bodies were discovered. The barn contained the corpses of 4 family members, partially covered with hay. The house held the bodies of the maid and the infant. The scene was confusing and deeply disturbing to those who found it. Local authorities were notified and an investigation began. The police arrived from nearby towns, followed by criminal investigators from Munich. The crime scene was poorly preserved. Numerous people walked through the farm buildings before proper forensic procedures were applied. Bodies were moved, tools were handled, evidence was inadvertently contaminated. At the time, forensic science was limited, and rural crime scenes were often approached without strict protocols. This would later hinder the investigation significantly. The autopsies confirmed that all 6 victims had died from blows inflicted by a sharp, heavy object. The timing of death was estimated to be several days prior to discovery. No defensive wounds were conclusively identified, suggesting that the victims may have been taken by surprise. The infant's death indicated deliberate intent rather than accidental harm. Investigators searched for motives. Robbery was quickly ruled out. The presence of money and valuables contradicted financial motives. No clear signs of forced entry were found. Attention turned to individuals known to the family. Former employees were questioned, including the previous maid who left months earlier. She reiterated her claims about strange noises and fear, but denied any involvement. Neighbors were interviewed. Some recalled seeing unfamiliar figures near the woods in the weeks before the murders. Others mentioned long-standing tensions involving Andreas Gruber. His reputation was poor. He was known to be harsh, controlling, and often in conflict with others. However, no specific threats or disputes were identified that could clearly explain the crime.
One line of inquiry focused on Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who was officially reported killed during the First World War. Some villagers speculated that he might have survived and returned secretly. This theory gained traction due to the secrecy surrounding the farm and the unusual behavior observed after the murders. However, military records and testimonies from fellow soldiers strongly supported his death in combat. No credible evidence emerged to suggest his survival. Another suspect was a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had known the family well and was believed by some to be the father of Josef. He was among the first to arrive at the farm after concerns were raised. His behavior at the scene attracted suspicion. Witnesses later claimed that he entered the house alone, touched bodies, and appeared unusually calm. Schlittenbauer denied any wrongdoing. He stated that he was searching for survivors. He cooperated with investigators and was questioned multiple times. Despite persistent suspicion from the public, no definitive evidence linked him to the murders. Investigators also considered the possibility of a transient worker or vagrant. The rural landscape allowed for movement without detection.
A person could hide in the forest, observe the farm, and enter unnoticed. The footprints leading from the woods to the house suggested prior observation. The missing keys indicated access without forced entry. The fact that someone remained on the farm after the murders implied familiarity with farm routines. This could point to someone with agricultural knowledge. Despite extensive questioning and public interest, the case stalled. Leads were pursued and abandoned. Witness statements conflicted. Evidence was insufficient to support charges against any suspect. Over time, the case grew cold. Official investigations were reopened periodically, but each effort reached the same conclusion. No perpetrator could be conclusively identified. The murders remained unsolved. The aftermath of the crime had lasting effects on the region. The farm was abandoned. The buildings were eventually demolished. A memorial marker was placed near the site, but no structure remained. The land returned to agricultural use, its history fading into memory. The case entered local folklore, discussed in whispers and retold across generations. It became one of Germany's most infamous unsolved crimes. In later decades, criminologists and historians revisited the case. New theories emerged, often influenced by modern forensic understanding. Some suggested a single perpetrator acting alone. Others proposed multiple attackers. Psychological profiling was applied retrospectively, though such methods could not produce concrete conclusions. Each theory relied on assumptions shaped by incomplete evidence. The Hinterkaifeck murders continue to be studied because of their complexity and unresolved nature. The combination of apparent premeditation, prolonged presence at the crime scene, and lack of clear motive challenges conventional explanations. The case illustrates the limitations of early 20th century criminal investigations. It also reflects the vulnerability of isolated communities where crimes can occur unseen and remain unexplained. Beyond speculation, what remains certain is the loss of 6 lives. The victims were not symbols or mysteries, but individuals bound by family and circumstance. Their deaths disrupted a community and left questions that may never be answered. The silence that followed the murders has endured for more than a century. The shadows of Hinterkaifeck persist not because of sensational details, but because of the absence of resolution. The story of the farm serves as a reminder of how ordinary environments can conceal extraordinary violence. It demonstrates how gaps in evidence can allow multiple narratives to coexist without certainty. The Hinterkaifeck case remains open in the historical sense, not because new clues are expected, but because the truth was never established. The farm is gone. The people are gone. What remains is a record of events that resists closure. In the years after the murders, official records were archived, witnesses aged, and memories faded. Attempts to reconstruct the timeline relied on second-hand accounts and deteriorating documentation. Each retelling introduced minor variations. Over time, the boundary between fact and interpretation blurred. Responsible examination requires restraint, attention to verify details, and acknowledgement of uncertainty. The enduring interest in the case reflects a broader human need to understand unexplained violence. Yet understanding does not always lead to answers. In the absence of definitive conclusions, the Hinterkaifeck murders stand as an example of unresolved history. They remain a case where investigation, speculation, and silence intersect. The farm once existed as a place of labor and family life. For a brief period, it became a crime scene. Afterward, it became a symbol. Today, it exists only in records and memory. The murders at Hinterkaifeck are remembered not for spectacle, but for their unresolved nature and the quiet persistence of unanswered questions.